Welcome everybody to our last lecture this semester in Translation Lecture Series at the Center for Translation Studies. It is actually a great honor to finally be hosting Dr. Faiza Haikal at the Center. It's been a long time since we discussed the prospect of having her with us, and here at last is her long-awaited lecture, and I'm really very pleased that she has accepted our invitation. Faiza Haikal is Professor Emerita of Egyptology at AUC, and I must say that we are most fortunate to count her among AUC's distinguished faculty. She was the first Egyptian woman to earn a PhD in Egyptology and the first female president of the International Association of Egyptologists. Haikal was also the first Egyptian woman to work in Nubia during the salvage of the monuments threatened by the building of the Aswan High Dam, and has been honored by the British-based Egypt Exploration Society and the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities for her illustrious career in Egyptology. Professor Haikal received her bachelor's in Egyptology from Cairo University and her PhD in Egyptology from Oxford University in England. Her international career in academia has included posts as visiting professor at Charles University in Prague in the year 2000 and La Sapienza in Rome in 1994. Furthermore, she has lectured extensively in North and South America, Europe, the Far East, and Africa. In 2006-2007, Professor Haikal was the Blaise Pascal Chair of Research offered by the Fondation de l'École Normale Supérieure and hosted by the Sorbonne for researching and lecturing. In addition to research, teaching, and supervision of graduate research at all levels at both national and international universities, Professor Haikal has often been part of juries abroad for the evaluation of academic research or academic projects internationally. Besides her research and publications in Egyptology in both English and French, Professor Haikal is particularly interested in ethno-Egyptology and on the impact of ancient Egypt on today's national and international culture. Professor Haikal has served and continues to serve on several distinguished international boards and congresses, such as the French Archaeological Institute in Cairo, the Biblioteca Alexandrina in Egypt, the International Association of Egyptologists, among others. Professor Haikal was presented in 2003 with a book of homage published by the IFAO in Egypt and entitled Homage à Faiza Haikal in celebration of her rich and illustrious career. I am delighted actually that we have been able to persuade her to join us today. Her lecture this evening is entitled Translating Ancient Egyptian Culture and Language. And without further ado, I give you the floor and welcome to our lecture series.
Firstly, thank you very much, Dr. Samia, for your introduction, which is very flattering. Really, but I hope that my lecture will be okay, because this is not the sort of work I've been doing before. So I hope it will be fine. Now I'm trying to get my PowerPoint. So I have to put it on share screen. Is that so?
Yes, you have to share your screen.
Yeah.
Just open the PowerPoint first and then share your screen.
Well, here it is. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fine. So I want to speak about translating ancient Egyptian literary text, and I'm insisting on the word literary because ancient Egyptian has left us so much written documentation that it would be impossible to cover it in a very long time. So I'm just speaking about literary text and the general translation for the general definition for a translation, and I shouldn't say it to you because you are the expert, The purpose of translation is to convey the original tone and intent of a message, taking into account cultural and regional differences between source and target languages. This is a very, very important point. This is why I'm writing it in black, that you can see. But tonight, we are dealing with a different kind of language. It's what used to be a very rich language is now a dead language. And I shall be speaking of literary texts written in this language in specific scripts dating from 2500 before Christ to 400 a common era. And I'm just also insisting on that point because it's almost 3,000 years of literature. Obviously, during 3,000 years, the language has a lot of time to develop vocabulary, develop grammar, develop science. So it's not something that is just 2 centuries ago or 3 centuries ago, like or 4 centuries ago for the maximum, when we are talking about Western literature in general. So all this has to be taken into consideration when you are going to listen to passages from ancient Egyptian literature. And according to me, they are as modern writings and beautiful modern writings. And this is what we are going to talk about in a moment. Obviously, you probably all know that Champollion deciphered hieroglyphics in 1822, nearly 2 centuries ago. However, we did not automatically start to translate text. It took about a century to establish the reading of the words and their semantic and syntax of the language before one could even dream of understanding the text and well enough in order to attempt a translation. The language, like any other language, developed, as I told you, and the science to write it also developed tremendously, because from about 700 signs, around 2500 before Christ, they reach in the Greco-Roman period, that is to say, around the turn of the era, from 300 before Christ to 400 after, they had reached 7,000 signs. Hieroglyphics is not an alphabetic sign. It has alphabetic sign, but it is not totally like that. It is signs, not letters. In addition to that, we also have enigmatic writing, but it is another story. We are not going to go into, to dwell into it today because it's too complicated. Now I would like to speak about the scripts of Egypt, so that you realize the difficulty first of the script, of deciphering the script. The scripts of Egypt are called hieroglyphics. We all know that, but it's not only hieroglyphics, that is to say signs which are inscribed, and most of the time they are inscribed. The signs are taken from nature and they are inscribed. Hieroglyphics are normally inscribed on walls of temple and tombs, on statues, etc. That is to say, on hard stone material. When hieratic started into being read and into being written fluently, is around, as I said, 2500 before Christ. And by that time, we also had, together with hieroglyphic, a cursive of hieroglyphics called hieratic, which is written usually on papyri, and in any case, it's essentially the same as hieroglyphic, but simplified, very simplified. The forms are simplified, not the language. And I'm going to show it to you right now. And this is the most important writing for daily life things, and literature is included in the daily life matters. So daily life matters are letters, stories, poetry, etc. And this is what is called usually the belles lettres, and this is usually written in hieratic. Now, Demotic is another script also of ancient Egypt, but it came much, much later. It came only in the 7th century before Christ, and it's a cursive from Hieratic. As for Coptic, it is the last stage of the Egyptian language, and it is written in Greek characters with an addition of few letters to have the sounds. These additions of a few letters are from the Egyptian Demotic, and it is in order to have the signs that they did, the sounds that they did not have before. And of course, Coptic continued, and it still exists today. But particularly in the usage of Coptic is only in churches now. And it does not, when I speak about ancient Egyptian literature, I do not include Coptic literature in it because it's very, very different, and a lot of it is religious. Now, here is what they look like. This is the famous Rosetta Stone, which was discovered by Champollion. It has on top of it, it has hieroglyphics. I don't know how the screen, how big it is at your end, so I'm not sure that you see it very well. And here we have the Greek writing, and here we have the Demotic writing. But I will show you this here because it's clearer. This is hieratic, and hieratic, in order to be published, has to be transcribed into hieroglyphics. So what you see here is exactly this text, which has been transcribed into hieroglyphics. And this is from the 12th dynasty, that is to say, it's Middle Kingdom. And the handwriting developed as to that. And since it is a handwriting, it can be different also than that, but I'm just giving you samples. And this is the transcription of hieratic. And at the very end, you have, this is Demotic, which is obviously much more complicated to read than hieratic in most of its stages. And hieratic is Demotic is also transcribed in hieroglyphics, but much less so because it's really very complicated, and the words are taken a little bit as a general block altogether, not sign by sign. So here you can see hieroglyphics very well, very clearly, very neat. And this dates also from the Old Kingdom around 2400 before Christ. And it is a text, the first text in the world, actually, which have been written as a long text. This is called the pyramid text, which are inscribed inside the pyramids. And they are very beautiful. I will show you some details of them just for you to appreciate it. And this, you see, is what they look like. And we can, here you can see, for example, this is a cartouche. The name of the king is always in a cartouche. This is the pyramid of Pepi. The other one was the pyramid of Unas. So it's a difference. There is a bit of a difference. And of course, all this is legible. And as you see, it's written here from top to bottom. But there is also a possibility of writing from horizontal lines. And I shall explain to you this in a moment. Now, hieratic is written on plants, on papyrus, which comes from these plants. And it's written in order to make papyrus rolls. As you can see there here, when you open papyrus rolls, you find hieratic writing of different kinds. This, for example, is, I think it's a medical text. And it is written with reeds like that. And this is a palette, which the palette itself is inscribed, but this is the reeds, and you put it here. We used to, when we were children, we used to have boxes like that you could open and put your pencils in. So the scribe writes, again, what you have seen here. I'm showing it for you more clearly. Here he puts the reeds, here he puts some water, and these are the blocks of color with which he's going to write. Now, What is the language made of? The language, as you see here, is made of signs, not of alphabet. Some of these signs are alphabetic, some are not. So we call the alphabetic signs uniliteral signs, and there are also biliteral signs and triliteral signs. Uniliteral means one letter, one sound. Biliteral are two sounds, like for example, this sign, which reads per, and that sign, triliteral, which reads hate. The very famous key of life that everybody knows is pronounced anch, and it is a triliteral sign. So these signs are written either vertically or horizontally, and in order to read them, you have to face the humans and the animals. So this one, I have to stand opposite them and read them in this way. And these ones, it's the same system. I still have to read them in this way, but up, down. So in addition now, something very, very important, and which has a very important role in what we are going to talk about, is the signs that have no phonetic value at all, and they are called determinatives. I'm coming to that in a moment, and I shall explain what it is. These are the Egyptian alphabetic signs, but they are not the only one, as I told you. There are other signs, the biliteral and the triliteral signs, and the determinatives. Now, when we have a text, here is a complete text, you have the signs here, the hieroglyphics, then you have the transliteration, and then you have our translation, O overseer of the house, etc. Well, the determinative is a sign which is usually added at the end of the word to categorize the word in order that we can understand. Of course, there are no divisions like that. These are divisions between words which have been done by the editors. But normally all the signs are together, so it makes it a bit difficult. However, we get used to it like anything else. And the determinative help to know where is the end of the word. Here we have a determinative, these two legs, because the verb per means to go out, that is to say to walk out. And therefore we have legs to indicate that it is a verb of action, of walking. If it were something else, you would have another determinative. For example, here it says uben, these are alphabetic signs, and this is a determinative, we don't pronounce it, but uben means to rise. Therefore, they put a sun, because there could be another word meaning uben, which is not to rise. So the determinatives clarifies what it is. Same thing with per. Here, for example, you have a man raising his hands, and it means to worship. So when you read the word senes, you know that it means to worship. So all this is very vivid and very clear, and for the Egyptian, they got so used to it that it was striking. And as we have, I'm going to give you a quote here from somebody to give you exactly the impression that this made on people. Just a minute, I get my quote, I want to have it right. This is Jan Assmann, who is a very important Egyptologist, still alive, and really he's one of the greatest of our generation. He says that using a vocabulary which he says that the hieroglyphics, as opposed to the other languages, give you immediate signification, unknown to all the other alphabetic systems. It is much more evident to postulate a correlation between the iconic sign of the hieroglyphic script and the things of reality, I showed you, than between the words of other languages and the things of nature. This is why they have an immediate signification, and of course, this is very important. So we are going to see now how also the difficulty of reading, because all the texts are filled. Papyrus is very fragile. Sometimes it's broken, sometimes you don't see the end of a text or the beginning of the text. But there are a number of texts in Egypt which are repetitious. For example, we have hundreds and thousands of papyri of religious texts, which I'm not going to deal with here. But we have stories like the story of Sinoe the Egyptian, is a very, very famous story, which was written in the Middle Kingdom and which continued to be copied, because that was a way of learning how to write and how to write and how to write as a scribe, write science and write literature. So they were making the students copy it in order to learn. The little people learned it. So we have, for example, you see here, we have the same, these are different versions, but this one is incomplete. So I'm completing it from here and so on. This one, same story. Whenever you have broken passages like that, which are hatched, we can complete them from another version. So it helps, but it's another complicated matter in order to make the text complete. Okay, not only that, but also we have now dictionaries for ancient Egyptian language, a lot of different dictionaries. The first one was published in the 20s of the 19th century, while Champollion discovered hieroglyphics in 1822. The first dictionaries were around, made in Germany, as you can see from translation, around 1920 and some. So it took a full century to begin to realize what is ancient Egyptian language, to have some grammar books, etc. So it was not so evident as any language written in a living language, alive. So now about the translators, the language and their difficulty. The translators, before I talk about them, I want to salute them, because they, in spite of all the difficulties of the language, they have translated a lot, not always ideally, but at least a big part of it is very well translated. And so I really salute them, because it was not an easy matter to bring this very rich literature to the world in general. This being said, I want also to speak about the problems of the translators themselves, because we, at the very beginning, the definition of translation included respecting the culture of the language that we are translating into the language to which it is translated. So evidently, we have translators now from practically most of countries of the Western world, and not only the Western, but also Japanese and Chinese, and of course, Egyptians. So they come from very, very different backgrounds, and they cannot escape their backgrounds, which influences them, and also their ideology and a lot of things which are of their personalities, obviously. And the personality of the translator and his ideology is sometimes reflected in their translation. And this is quite a problem, because some of them have found that the literature is so rich and so, how shall I say, intemporal. It has no time. It is so rich, it's good today. So they wanted to modernize it and almost to appropriate it. And this, according to many people, can result in nice literature, but it is not very Egyptian. And on the other hand, there is also the idea that we should, in order to respect their culture, we should respect the language as it is, because according to Egyptians, the language and the script are a gift of the gods. And both of them are extremely charged. The vocabulary is very, very charged, not only the meaning of the word, you get the meaning of the word, and you get it also by the sound. So just the very act of translation was not very much appreciated by the Greek, the Egyptian. And I'm talking about the Greek because they were in language that in the late period, in the very late period, the Greco-Roman period, there is a very famous text called the Hermetic documents. I'm not finding exactly, excuse me, which says about the text that they should never be translated. I give you, particularly because of the sounds. For example, I give you an example of how the sound of the language. Hatshepsut, the queen of the very famous queen of the 18th dynasty, has obelisks transported from Aswan because they are granite, and they are also cut, transported, inscribed, and gilded in a very short period of time. So she is admirable, obviously. And the people are, the Egyptian people almost divinized her. And in ancient Egypt, the royalty was divinized, as you know. Anyway, they say about her, and I'm reading hieroglyphics, Cheperet, Cheperu, mi Cheperi, Achet Achti, mi Achti. Achet Achu, mi Achti. So you hear the sound, is very strong by itself. And unfortunately, when it is translated into English, it loses the sound value to begin with. And of course, it also loses the meaning. And I compare this to the English meaning, the English translation, to a bad background music of a very good movie. You know, you are losing this energy which is in the language. So the Egyptian did not like this translation, the language to be translated at all. Now I'm giving you more reasons why the language is so difficult to translate, because it has grammatical elements and vocabulary elements which are either untranslatable, mostly untranslatable, and sometimes not understandable by Western culture, who is the culture who translated most about our culture. For example, the determinatives, I told you already, the determinatives are categorizing words, fine-tuning the meaning of the little words. I told you before that if you have legs with the word which pronouns per, it is to show that this is a person who is walking. While if another per could mean something else, it will be determined by another sign. So this helps enormously. And how is it fine-tuning the meaning of the word, of the written word? By having sometimes more than one determinative, sometimes it's two determinatives. And the second is really giving its extra layer of depth of the word. An example for this, for example, I'm talking about a little child in a story, and this little child is written as a child with a ponytail on the side, and this is how a child is written. And he is seated as a child should sit. But if you change, or if you add to him a uraeus on the brow, he's no longer a regular child. It becomes a graphic metaphor, and it tells you this is not a child, this is a royal child. So this is how you determine it. The same thing happens if you are talking about, if you want to do jeunesse, and jeunesse is an Arabic term for literature, and you can play with determinatives and play with signs. It is one of many literary devices used by ancient Egyptian and Arabic in order to deliver the intended message creatively. It is adding something to the sound or to the visual aspect of the literature, and it is a kind of graphic metaphors or graphic things which attract the vision of the person who is reading the text. And this has been very much studied recently by one of our younger colleague called Hani Rashwan, and he is championing this idea that if you do not know Arabic, you find it very difficult to translate many things or to enjoy many things which are in the ancient language of Arabic and of ancient Egyptian and Egyptian Arabic. So, or even classical Arabic, I would say. So one of the example of Jeunesse, you have it here, for example, she, the goddess of love, gave her, the girl that the person loved, to me as a gift. D, S, set, and E, senet, MD. The Jeunesse here is playing on the set, which is her, and the senet, which is the girl, and both words have S in it, and they respond to each other. DS is to give, and D, MD as a present. So there is a relationship between the words and their meanings, which is particular to ancient Egyptian language and Arabic language, of course. The interaction between the meaning of the text and the spelling of words is so important, and it's so vivid in that Angela MacDonald who is an Egyptologist, of course, she was speaking about visual literariness, which I also call graphic metaphors sometimes, because it added to the meaning. But this was so common in ancient Egypt that the ancient Egyptian, when they were speaking about a text, they would not say, I want to read your text. They say, I want to see your text. The verb ma here is to see. So the translation of this is, My Majesty saw this beautiful, beautiful writing that you were to bring to the palace on this beautiful day to make happy the heart of the king Isisi, justified. Now, when I repeated nefer twice here and justifies twice here, it's neither an error of my writing or an error of the Egyptian. It is an Egyptian way to make a superlative. By repeating twice, you say gamil, gamil means very beautiful. You say justified, justified means fully justified. These are things which are not appreciated by the Western taste, which are typical and appreciated by the Oriental taste of literature. Another example, I want to see your writing, not to read your writing. He wants to see it because he reads it with his eyes, and with the eyes he can understand even better when he sees the kind of writing with the determinative, etc. And I'm repeating here the sound of the word, which is so important. Chaperet chau, chaperet cheperu mi chaperi, charet hawi mi achti. And here you have not only the sound and the meaning, but you have a grammatical construction as well, which does not exist in Western languages. So for us, it exists in Arabic. It's called maf'ul mutlaq for people who know Arabic. And it emphasizes the verb. Khaper, khaperu means to come into being, a being. So it's like to beat him a beating. It's the rare exceptions that you have in languages to he was beaten a beating, meaning he was beaten very strongly. And I was mentioning to you about the corpus hermeticus, which I couldn't find on my notes. Here it is. And he says why you should never translate the Egyptian language, for the Greek is empty words, good for showing off. And the philosophy of Greek is just, sorry, I can't read the rest, For our part, we use not word, but sounds full of energy. So that will give you an idea of what they speak of their language. There are now, there are other things like expressions which are very typical to Egyptian and Arabic. For example, in the sun god, in a hymn to the sun god written by Akhenaten, the monotheistic pharaoh, he mentions that in the underworld, he says, in the underworld you make a Nile, that you bring him forth as to feed your population, since you make them for you yourself, and for growing weary on their account. Growing weary on their account does not at all render the meaning of the hieroglyphics ورد إمسان الذين تعبت فيهم. It's not being weary on the accounts, it's being weary in creating them, in making them, in taking care of them. All this is making him weary. So, of course, you are losing a lot if you are translating expressions that you do not have the equivalent in foreign languages, Western languages. Another case like this one is tham and afher, which, for example, means in Egyptian the same as in Egypt, covering the face, satr al-wajh in Arabic. And covering the face is really a little bit like to protect, you are covering the face to protect the person from shame. But this nuance and this more depth in the importance of the words is not translated, it's not rendered by cause indulgence. That the speech of a man, he says the speech of a man to defend himself saves his face, covers for him the face, means it protects him from shame, and this is caused indulgence for him by Simpson, translated like that. Of course, the translation, although Simpson is a great scholar, but the translation is weak compared to the original text. There are other problems, which are nobody's problem except the language, that there are words which mean too many things, like the word mu, for example. Mu means water, but it means all liquids, and it means other things. And people, for example, the same sentence, you will find it translated by great scholars in completely different different ways. For example, one says, the king Amenemhat I was attacked and probably killed, and he is making a posthumous wisdom text to warn his son about people. He says, the one who anointed himself with my myrrh poured lowly water, is the one who poured lowly water. What is lowly water? Honestly, I don't understand this very much. Another translation tells you he poured water, slippery water. Maybe some translation. However, there is another scholar who is called Burkhardt who analyzed the text completely differently. He said there is a sign which has been omitted in front of kheri, which makes the word in front of kheri under me or something like that. It makes it mecheri, a granary. And he translates that he poured water in my granary. Personally, I accept this emendation. However, I translate poured water from my granary or in my granary, and water in my sense, in my interpretation, means wealth, because by pouring the water on it, pouring it out, he is pouring the wealth away. And my interpretation is supported by another text in which the word mu is said to be, I'm just giving you the translation, good indeed is the king's heart when offerings of every foreign land come to him, for indeed this is our water, this is our prosperity. So water is prosperity, you see. And in Arabic, we have the same thing. If we say that we are going to cut his water, it means that we are going to cut his prosperity or his resources. So resources and prosperity, mu, can expect so many different things. Anyway, we have also metaphors with water. And a man, for example, who is very annoyed, he said, I opened my mouth to speak, I poured out my water and I vented that which was in my belly. So there is a completely, such a variety of meanings for a single word that it is very difficult for the translator. Of course, the context helps him, but it is difficult for a translator sometimes to know which one to use. Then there are also other metaphors, like, for example, in order for a young boy to study, his father tells him, do study, there is nothing better than books that are bought on water. Like a boat on water means, of course, to take you very far. In Egypt, all transport is made by water, all advancement is made by water. The Nile is the main thing that we use. Now, what is a hapax? This is also another problem for translators. A hapax is a word which occurs only once in the data established. The data what we have, we don't find a parallel to it, so it's very difficult to know the meaning because the meaning is made out of context. But the only thing that can give you some indication is the determinative. If, for example, you have a bird, well, you will say, well, this word means some kind of bird, but you don't know which one. But it's better than nothing. And there are also expressions like that which occur only once, and we don't know what they mean. For example, in the text of Hatshepsut, where she is bragging that she made her obelisks in 7 months only, she had it done from the quarry, all the place in Luxor, the quarry in Aswan, and transported to Luxor and gilded and inscribed and everything and erased, set up. And the whole thing took 7 months. And she said at the end, Gessen Hertebsen, which means their side is on their heads, which by itself means nothing. However, in the context, the people who are listening to her would react and say, it is impossible. This is how I think. And I think it is also supported by the continuation of the context when she says, do not say when you hear this that I'm lying. My tongue will never pronounce a lie, etc., etc., and she continues. So, in my opinion, this is how we translate language, and this is why we have different opinions, and some are accepted, some are rejected, of course. Now, in order to, here I am going to show you the difference of translation of poetry. Poetry is the most difficult thing we have to translate because firstly, poetry, love poetry, these are love poetry. Poetry in Egypt has existed all the time. However, love poetry is very specific of the Ramesside period, that is to say dynasty 19 and 20 in the New Kingdom. And afterwards, it disappeared. And before that, it did not exist. And in my opinion, this is essentially due to the fact that there were a lot of influences and people coming from abroad living in Egypt, etc. So that may have produced creations of new genres in literature, and poetry, this kind of poetry may be one of them. Anyway, I'm just going to read for you a poem, the poem that is here. That's a young man who says, I'm sailing downstream on the ferry, guided by the hand of the helmsman, with my bundle of reeds on my shoulder. I am bound for Ankhtawi. Ankhtawi is a place in Memphis, near Cairo. And I shall say to Ptah, the Lord of Maat is justice, grant me my beloved this night. And then he looks around him, he's on the ferry, and he says, the river is wine, Ptah is its reeds, Sekhmet is its lotus leaf, Yadet is its lotus bud, Nefertum is its lotus flower. There is rejoicing as the land brightens in its beauty. Memphis is a bowl of mandrakes laid before the God who is beautiful of face. Now you have to know two things. that mandrakes is an erotic, the presentation of mandrakes is an erotic fruit and erotic sign, and that all the gods who are mentioned here, Ptah, Sekhmet, Nefertum, and Yadet, are the gods of the city of Memphis. This is very close to the Egyptian text. Now we have other translations which are also close to the Egyptian text, but there is another one by John Foster, who is one of the great poets who has translated by modernizing a little bit. And I'm going to tell you what he says, because it is quite different, and you will see the difference. And I shall mention to you my objections. I am bound downstream on the Memphis ferry like a runaway, snapping all ties with my bundle of old clothes over my shoulder. I'm going down there where the living is going on, there to that big city, and there I tell Ptah, give me a girl tonight. The other one was my girl, here is a girl. Look at the river eddying, in love with the young vegetation. Ptah himself is the life of those reed shoots. Lady Sekhmet of the lilies, yes, Our Lady of Dew dwells among lily pads, and their son, Nefertum, sweet boy, blossoms newborn in the blue lotus. Twilight is heavy with gods, and the quiet joy of tomorrow dawn whitening over her loveliness. O Memphis, my city, beauty forever, you are a bowl of love's own berry dish set for Ptah, the god handsome of face. Well, this can be very attractive, of course, very romantic, and adapted to maybe more, I should say, more modern taste. However, it's no longer the same story at all. It's no longer the same sonority. It doesn't sound Egyptian anymore, except for the name of the gods. But it is very different from the original. And I think that it's very good to have literature of the past, but live it to the past, because the past has beauty. When people write like that, 2,000 years before Christ, or 1,300 exactly, to give you the exact date of the poems, they write in a way which does not have to be exactly the same as what we are doing today. And the beauty of the poem has to also recall us that this is an Egyptian poem. It cannot become all of a sudden an American poem. And I will read another one for you, which has the same problem. But what he wrote is beautiful, and it, in my opinion, bringing something of the erotic feeling about it, about the boy who is so interested in going to Memphis because it's a big city full of people, it's a port, you have sailors, and there is all sorts of positive and negative things that happen there, which do not happen in the south of Egypt. That's good, I agree. However, all this can be something else. In my opinion, what he's looking at is, and he's praying the gods to give him, he is describing the river. The river is wine, he says, in the regular poetry. The river is wine, Ptah is its reeds, Sekhmet is its lotus leaf. All this reminds me personally of scenes of banquets, where people are seated having their banquets, and they are drinking wine. The river is wine, they are drinking wine in jars, but the jars are decorated with leaves and dew oozing out of the jar, because the Yadet is the divinity of dew, not at all, it is lotus buds and flowers, and people are drinking wine in ancient Egypt with straws. So the Ptah is the reeds, the Ptah is the reeds with which you are drinking the wine. So again, we have all this beauty. There is rejoicing as the land brightened in its beauty. I think that this comes after the fact that he wants to see his beautiful girl, and that the beautiful girl is, it should be, the land is brightened by its beauty, by her beauty, not its beauty, the beauty of the beautiful girl, because it's very similar to an expression that we say in Arabic, and we say nawart ad-dunya, exactly the translation in Arabic of the land brightens in its beauty. So you can see the metaphor, and if you have a context in modern Egypt which is similar, it definitely helps you and influences you as a translator, of course, if you are Egyptian, and somehow it responds better to our emotion and our vision of the matter. Now I'll give you another example. Yes, he says, the young girl says to her lover, "My desire is to descend and to bathe in your presence, that I may look, that I may let you look upon my beauty in a tunic of finest royal linen, besprinkled with perfume. I shall go down into the water with you, and I shall come out to you bearing a red fish, firmly held in my hand. And I shall lay it before you, my beloved. Come and look upon me. And my desire is to go down to bathe before you, so I may cause you to see my beauty in this robe of finest linen." It's the same text described by someone else. Well, the red fish is, again, a symbol, it's an erotic symbol in ancient Egypt. And when she tells her beloved that she wants him to see her with her tunic of finest linen, obviously it is because when she is in the water, the tunic is clinging to her body, and he sees her and imagines whatever he wants. Now, this image, which is normal to, I think, is translated in modern by John Foster. "Love, how I'd love to slip down to the pond, bathe with you close by on the bank. Just for you, I'd wear my new Memphis swimsuit, made of sheer linen, fit for a queen. Come see how it looks in the water. Couldn't I coax you to wade in it with me? Let the cool creep slowly around us." No, I think that this Memphis swimsuit and this tone used is not at all Egyptian, even if it can appeal to people, but it's not at all Egyptian. Now, last poem I want to discuss with you is one in which the girl, again, is waiting for her lover, and she says in her anxiety, would that you come in haste to your beloved, like a gazelle bounding across the desert. Its feet move swiftly and its limbs are weary. You must take your way right up to her gateway, that your hand may be kissed 4 times, for you are pursuing the affections of your beloved, and it is the golden goddess who has destined her for you. Now, I personally have translated this text differently, in particularly the parts that your hand may be kissed 4 times. In the text, it implies probably that the girl is going to kiss the hand of her beloved 4 times. But in my opinion, it is he who should kiss his hands 4 times. In Egypt, we do that. Yeah? To say thank you to God. It's a gesture of thanksgiving. And he should thank God for his arriving safe, because he is compared to a gazelle who was hunted. So he should thank God that he arrived safe and that he reached his beloved whom is given to him by the golden goddess, the goddess Hathor, mistress of love. And everywhere in Egypt, you will have a mixture of the divine and reality, the beauty and the gods. They are always mixed. And it's very strange, because even in Egypt today, for example, you say, Ya salat al-nabi ala halawat al-bint. You say a girl is beautiful, and then you may the prophet be blessed for it. So there is this feelings that we do not have anywhere else as easily as we find them in Egypt. And we have to keep this feeling. If you don't keep this feeling, we lose the Egyptianity of the text. That's the problem. Now, something completely different is the difficulty of the text. Now, I'm giving you a passage from Papyrus Vendier, which was translated by the professor of the Collège de France, Professor Posner, and he said, I don't understand this passage. I'm going to read the passage for you, and this is the last one, by the way, and how I interpret it because I'm Egyptian, and how he interprets it because he's French. And he says he doesn't understand. I read it in front of him at a conference, and he told me, yes, I agree with you. Anyway, Pharaoh didn't restrain himself from taking a meal at night, while Pharaoh's eye was very big, until a night happened when Pharaoh pushed aside the meal prepared for him as usual. The food, because the food didn't taste good in his mouth, it was like, didn't taste good. And then there is a description. The eyes of the enemy of Pharaoh became still. He couldn't sleep, his clothes didn't stick to him, and he looked like a man coming out of a river. This is the French translation, which I translated into English. Now, my translation goes like that. Pharaoh didn't restrain himself from taking a meal at night. So far, so good. It being that Pharaoh was very greedy. A big eye in Arabic and in Egypt means to be very greedy. Ein fargha, we would say in Arabic. That Pharaoh was very greedy until a night happened when Pharaoh added to the meal, not put him aside. The word used in hieroglyphics is good for both. Pharaoh added to the meal prepared for him as usual. The eye of the enemies of Pharaoh became still. He couldn't sleep. His clothes didn't fit, and he was sweating abundantly. Well, I kept the eye of the enemies because we say the same thing in Arabic. When we don't want something to happen, we say it happens to your enemy. Inshallah al-adu, we say in Arabic. It happens to your enemy. But of course, a person who is not an Egyptian doesn't know that. And he was wondering, what is the enemy coming here for? And why the eye was big. So that was a bit confusing. And the last part of it, in Arabic, we have the same metaphor for a man who is sweating abundantly, like coming out of water. غرقان من المية, completely washed out with water. So that was I'm trying to convey here to you two things. Firstly, the importance of the text, to be as close to the text as possible, to keep its age, because age has also a value, and also and its charm, and also to convey to you the advantage of knowing Arabic if you are going to translate this kind of texts. Now, there is something completely different, which I like very much. It is the author's intentions and the reader performance and the audience interpretation. They may be totally different. For example, in his seminal inaugural lecture at Queen College, Oxford, Richard Parkinson, with an actress and author, Barbara Ewing, presented a sentence, a word from the famous tale of Sinuhe, and how to interpret it, and how it is so difficult to interpret it. And it can be interpreted in so many different ways. Parkinson argues against a simple philological approach to literary text, and in his inaugural lecture, and he says that philology, which is necessary, needs to be complemented by beauty and feeling. And he exemplifies this by a sentence in the text. She, the queen, gives a loud cry. The queen, and then the queen asks, Sinuhe is coming back. He self-exiled, and then he came back to Egypt with the permission of the king, and the family, royal family is expecting him. And when he comes in, the queen gives a cry, and she asks afterwards, is it he indeed? Or is it he really? And the king answers, it is he really. Now, Barbara Ewing, who came with Richard Parkinson, is a writer and an actress. And he asked her to read different ways this passage to see that it can be read like, is it he really inquisitively or ironically, because he's coming dressed like an Asian. He's coming from Asia, from the Middle East, and he's totally different from an Egyptian who is sophisticated, shaved, clean, etc., etc. So it could be, she could be afraid of seeing him like that. She could be, in a way, happy to see him like that, because it's not normal that he is self-exiled and then coming here. I mean, there are many, many possible different intonations of the reader, and then you wonder what is the reaction. So what is also the reaction of the queen herself? How did she feel herself? Was she happy, unhappy? How is the audience reacting? And I mean, it brings the audience to think about very, very many possibilities. And this text, which was written, as I tell you, around 2000 before Christ, has, even for the pure philologist, resonance today, after 4,000 years of being written. So I think this will tell you something about the importance of being a writer in Egypt and how to write very well. So that's about writing, stories and poetry, etc. We have, of course, to translate other texts, like, for example, religious texts, and we have to understand them. It's difficult in any religion to understand the religious text, but in ancient Egypt even more, because in ancient Egypt we have clear exoteric texts and other esoteric texts. The exoteric texts are clear, and they include lamentation, for example, or hymn to the god, lamentation to the dead who people want to have him back and express their sorrow for missing him, etc. And interestingly enough, that these lamentations have their parallels in modern Egypt. There is a whole book on that, made by an American, by the way. And then, of course, also in Arabic, there are parallels to ancient Egyptian lamentation. And then there is the esoteric texts, who are very difficult to interpret. These esoteric texts are usually initiation texts, either to see to allow you to see God after you die, or to allow the priests to see the statue of the divinity in the temple. They are very difficult actually to understand, and because they are full of allusions to mythology that we don't know because we never had it. The Egyptians understand some of it, and the others, of course, like us, we don't understand. But Asman, because of his tremendous database in his head, he could interpret it as well with comparison, but they are very difficult, and sometimes they are even written in enigmatic writing. So I shall not delve into that. Now I would like to conclude my lecture with the words of Foster, who wrote something very nice. Doesn't always apply to what he's doing himself, but it's very nice. And I am going to read it for you. The works of ancient Egyptian literature and their authors are less well known than the works of art and architecture. In trying to read, he or she must also try to visualize the images and culture conveyed in the text, which is not an easy thing to do. At any rate, far from appearing in their rightful place at the fountainhead of world literature, the classics of Egypt remain out of the mainstream, covered in darkness. It is even now a rich literature, despite the fact that it lies before us in ruins, of course, with all the pieces and broken, etc. Enough remains for us to insist flatly that its masterpieces belong at the beginning of our traditions of world literature, as the fountainhead preceding the contribution of Greece and Israel. And thank you for your attention. So I'm done and ready for any question you want, if you still have the patience.
Dr. Hakel, well, and thank you so much for a truly fascinating evening. I mean, I can see from the participants' comments, we have upward of 100 participants. You have a large fan club. I can see that they're mesmerized actually by the literature and you know, ideas about translation that you have shared. We have two options. One, because we have such a large following, it would be difficult to allow the participants to speak. It will take forever. And therefore, my suggestion to everyone is that we break. We don't leave the meeting. You just stay there and please write your questions so that Dr. Hakel has time to see them on chat, which is in front of you on your screen, and then can just make a decision on which ones she is interested in responding to. I'm sure that there will be duplicates and repetitions, etc. And so I think it is best if we can receive your questions in writing, and you know, in the meantime, you can grab a cup of coffee or tea while Dr. Hakel sort of browses through the questions that are arriving on chat. We are around as well to assist her if anything sort of falls out of the bag and we think it's relevant and important, we will draw her attention to that.
Well, fine. I see that already a number of people were asking, they came a little bit late, and I was kind enough to answer and say that...
they're all questions that we responded to.
Yeah.
I hope that there are questions to you. I'm sure that there are other questions that are address the lecture itself.
Well, there is somebody called Rita who is saying, how can we know that they pronounce ha?
Right.
Well, we know some of the pronunciation we know from Coptic, okay? And then we have the signs which are not existing in Coptic, which are taken from Demotic, and we know that it's pronounced ha, because, well, that's a good question actually, because sometimes you have the alphabetic signs with what we call phonetic complement. For example, the kha is a circle, and we know it is kha because there is an aleph next to it, a word which represents an aleph, and then we know it is kha, not khi, not hu, for example.
So maybe we don't need to break. I see that, you know, Cynthia has commented, and she's right. Most of the comments we've received so far have to do with, can we get the recording? And, you know, because people came late. But so maybe we can take them now. Here's a new one. It's really saddening that ancient Egyptian literature hasn't received the deserved attention that, say, the Greek classics have received in terms of the representation in many modern languages today. But we should be...
This is Cynthia?
No, this is from Yumna Abdelbei.
Okay. Well, I couldn't agree more, but life continues and people are taking more attention. And I'm glad to say that there are many more Egyptians now who are involved with Egyptology and the language. And as I told you, we have a young Hani Rashwan who is giving a lecture on Genèse in New York very recently, and he studied in London. And you know, the thing also is that science has to be in a way interactive. You know, in the beginning of Egyptology, Egyptians were not really involved because it was dominated by foreigners who did not really want to involve them. It was under, Egypt was under occupation in these days, etc. So politics also has some importance. Now it's not the case. Now Egyptians, many Egyptians are Egyptologists, and this is very important, many foreigners, including Stephen Quirk from London University, Richard Parkinson from Oxford University, etc., who are beginning to accept this and to encourage them to do so. So this matters, because if you are all the time rejected, you cannot go forever. But this is coming, and I'm very glad about that. And it's coming, and we have plenty of time, inshallah, to compensate for the fact that we are coming in a bit late. But also we are coming in a bit late because it's very difficult, as I explained to you, and the hieroglyphics are not that easy, nor the hieratic, nor the demotic, etc. While Greek and Roman are the letters that are still used today, so they have not the same problem, and the languages are much more similar. We changed language, we're speaking Arabic now, so it's complicated, but it will happen. It will happen that literature will be acknowledged as the fountainhead, as Fox himself said. And we have, for example, wisdom literature, where you are under the impression when you are reading Aesop, for example, and the Fable de La Fontaine, that it is taken from ancient Egypt, because it has been translated and gradually it passed from one to another. So obviously there is so much in ancient Egypt that is precursing the rest of the world. So gradually people will admit it. Have I answered your question?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Next question.
What is your take on the...
Somebody say, can I have this lecture recorded? That depends on AUC.
Let me, we have questions here. What is your take on the ongoing debate of the fact that ancient Egyptian language could be related to Semitic languages?
Well, of course, it's very important. I believe so, because the grammar of ancient Egyptian is closer to Semitic languages than to other things. The language is not 100% Semitic, but it becomes more and more as Egypt interacts more and more with the Middle East. But it is originally Semitic, Hamitic, Afro-Asiatic. The Semiticism are getting more and more. And the grammar is the same thing. We have a lot of things which are similar. And in modern Egypt, in modern Arabic, we have a lot of things which are the same things as in ancient Egypt. I give you just an example like that quickly. For example, we say, we have many auxiliary verbs. And when I say auxiliary verb, it's a verb which does not give the meaning you want, but which helps to give you a meaning. For example, when you say in Arabic, it doesn't mean that he's seated. It means that he weeps continuously. We have the same aadi, being seated weeping. He can be standing and weeping, but seated weeping means to continue weeping. We have this in ancient Egypt. All the auxiliary verb, am darabak. He did not woke up. He just reacted to him with a beating, for example. Somebody did something wrong, and the other one, am darabu, he stood up. He did not stay. They were probably already up when they were fighting. So we have the same thing in Egyptian. All the auxiliary verbs that you can find in Arabic exist in Egyptian. And actually that was the subject of a thesis I gave to a student of mine, a PhD thesis at Cairo University when I was teaching there, and etc. I mean, there are expressions which are the same. There are grammatical forms which are the same. And definitely the Semitic approach is important. And it was suggested by my own professor, Professor Abdel Mohsen Bakir at Cairo University, and he published books in Cambridge called A Semitic Approach to the Egyptian Language. It didn't really click very much, although they were in English and published in Cambridge. But the whole idea is coming back now, reinforced by the number of Egyptians who are interested in the language.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Beyond the preservation of ancient Egyptian language and culture, why do you believe it is important to understand dead languages? Does a comprehension of ancient languages offer insights into contemporary Egyptian culture as well?
It does. It has two things which I believe very important. I myself have not worked so much on language as on tradition and on religion translation. So when people are telling you, where do we come from? They say, Masr or Medonia, Egypt is the mother of the world. But why? They don't always know why. It is the mother of the world, obviously, but because it has everything, it started everything, sciences, literature, religion, etc., etc. And I have many articles on the topic, but it's the matter is not me, it's that many Egyptians now are interested in this language and culture. And when Egyptians are interested in the culture of the past, it gives them pride in themselves. We're not doing very well at the moment. Sometimes we could do better, but we know that we can do better because we come from a great past. And that is good, I think, for identity. It is good also for experience. I wish we would learn from what was bad as well as from what was good, because nothing is paradise. It was not paradise. But it was really a great civilization, totally organized with institutions and everything. So this is why I think it's important to know that.
I have a question, if I may, because you seem to obviously be speaking about decolonizing Egyptology, right? That, you know, Egyptians have been sort of marginalized.
Yeah, that's a word which is often used now. Yes, the decolonization. It's not. I don't like it so much. I mean, of course, colonization had influence, but it's history. Right. Colonization is history as well, and when you say you want to decolonize and etc., it's very the word carries, like ancient Egyptian word, a very specific meaning. Yeah, it's not just to get away from them. It's just these horrible people, etc., etc.
No, but also to, as you presented in your lecture, to sort of double check on translations. What has happened to texts? What has happened with translators trying to carry across these ancient Egyptian texts, literary texts, to a different European culture? And I noticed, of course, that all of your examples are translations in English and probably French and German. And my question is, do we have any attempts at Arabic translations?
We have, but very often, and I am one to blame among other people, is that in Egyptology we have started to write in foreign languages our articles and books, etc., because we needed to be known, to be accepted by the international community. Now people are realizing that because we keep saying, well, if you don't know Arabic, you don't understand the culture. If you don't know Arabic, you don't understand the language. People are now beginning, the young generation of Egyptologists is trying a little bit to learn Arabic. And I think this is an achievement of my generation, and I'm happy to see that it works. But obviously, I mean, it is important that we write in Arabic as well. It's very important. Some of my colleagues have written in Arabic more than I have, whether it's historic books of history or books of culture, etc. But I will tell you, for example, one of my professors when I was at Cairo University, Abdulaziz Saleh, Allah yarhamu, was an excellent professor, excellent researcher, But nobody knows him because he wrote very little in foreign languages and he wrote very good books in Arabic. And sometimes he had ideas before the Western world and they didn't know it. So when they repeated the same thing without knowing it had been said before, it was considered their idea, not someone else's idea, an Egyptian idea.
Have there been attempts to translate what Egyptians like your professor you just met, to translate them into French or English? So
it's a bit too late now. It's too late because people have also thought about the same thing and published, etc. So it's a bit late, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm optimistic about the future because we have very intelligent and very brilliant young people who are doing research in all fields of all the discipline, whether it's material culture, archaeology, discovering archaeological sites, interpreting the sites. And I think when they have good interpretation, based also on their Egyptianity or Egyptianness, I don't know what's the most correct word. So it helps everybody. In my opinion, we should have teams, international teams, including foreigners and Egyptians working together because they draw each other's attentions on different things. I spent a lot of many years of my life saying, but everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. I'm not going to publish this. Everybody knows that. And then I realized that not everybody knows that at all. And this is when I started really writing, doing my own research on this topic.
Okay, so here we have a question. Are there any published translations of ancient Egyptian poetry? Who are the readers of such translation?
There are, but they are, again, like Foster is doing with Americanizing his poetry and having a swimsuit. We have people who are trying to give it Egyptian, keep the Egyptian flavor because they are Egyptian themselves. But it is not a really very close translation of the original text. It's inspired more than translated. But because we have so many things, for example, I'll give you something funny. There is a verse of poetry of a man who says to his beloved, I wish I were your shibshib al-habib, so that I can see you every day, your slippers. Well, we say it today. Where did you get it from? Nobody says anything like that. Except in folk literature. We have a lot of folk literature which replicates without realizing what was happening in ancient Egypt.
Okay, so here's a follow-up question on what you've just mentioned. Are the similarities with Arabic from the classical language or from colloquial Egyptian? Is it possible to include the comparisons as footnotes in translations, especially for those who don't read Arabic?
Well, I think it is very important, and what you say, that we should have footnotes for everything which is similar to Arabic. We have things which are like Arabic, classical Arabic, because of the Semitic aspect of the language. For example, I will tell you hasaba. Hasaba means to calculate in both languages. And hasaba, the roots is the same. Soba, the roots is the same, etc. There are very many words which are the same but pronounced differently. A little bit, because like dialect, they are a little bit different. And the passage of time also makes them, but we know that the roots are Arabic, classical Arabic. There are other words, we know that the roots is not classical Arabic, therefore it's purely Egyptian. Like, for example, I mentioned to you the verb to see the writing rather than to read the writing. Ma'a. This is the word in ancient Egypt. We have the word in Arabic, meaning to pay attention to what he's looking at. That this is not, I don't think it's a classical Arabic word. And we have many like that. So there are there are words from ancient Egypt which are using today in local Arabic.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a question regarding your critique, obviously, of existing translations and how they don't really carry across the sort of spirit, sounds, metaphors of ancient Egyptian language. And the question is, what would be a good edition or rendition of an Egyptian text that embodies all these images, sounds, and textual components of the Egyptian language for you? I mean,
there are
how
many
do you go
translations.
about
There are many. We have many translations of ancient Egyptian literature, but there are things which are untranslatable. The untranslatability of Egyptian language. Now it's a new topic which many people are researching. Like when I tell you the sound of the word, the metaphors. It's very difficult to translate. I mean, it's nobody's fault. It's just a different culture, different language, and different mazag. Also, as we say in Arabic, what we enjoy, repetition, is not enjoyable by the West. What we enjoy, the kind of musicality is not the same. What in the East is different.
Okay, here's an interesting question that begins with a big thank you to you for an inspiring lecture. And the question goes, I wonder what you would think about including Arabic language and literature in the Egyptological programs of Egyptology in many universities in the West. Egyptology is still part of classics, and students are not encouraged to study modern Egyptian Arabic.
Well, this is a big mistake, I think. They should be encouraged to study Arabic, and maybe colloquial more than classic, on the Egyptian dialects. They should, because it would make them better understand ancient Egypt, and it would be positive for themselves to feel the language. I mean, nobody, the Egyptologists in general, live many years of their life in Egypt, maybe separate seasons, but many years of their life they spend in Egypt. So if they could have some preparation for understanding the people they are dealing with. Sometimes they don't understand the people they are dealing with, and because they have a different culture. So by learning the language and the culture of the place where you are, I think is important. When we go abroad, we learn the language of the place where we are living, and we enjoy the place we are living in because we understand what they are doing. But if we don't understand, how can you enjoy it? You cannot enjoy it. You go to France, you go to England. If you don't know French or English, well, you don't enjoy what's going on around.
I have a question for you about Egyptology at AUC, actually. We are supposed to be, I mean, we own this, right? And if anything, this should be the greatest seat for Egyptology.
It is.
And, no, but
it is indeed, yes. It is, or at least now I am not teaching anymore, but it is. I know it is. And I can assure you, I don't like to sound like I'm making a compliment to myself, but some people told me, well, it is different when you are teaching, because I convey to them the feeling that other people do not have.
Yeah.
Well, it's not their fault.
Right. Yeah. No, but I'm talking about the size of the program.
Well, I tell you something. We had very good students. Some of them were doing a double major because, and I can understand, their parents would not pay for Egyptology because they will not get a job that pays when they come out. And as we all know, AUC is a very expensive university. When you invest that much money in it, in your kids and putting them at AUC, they want them to learn something that they're going to use and have money back somehow. So that's the problem. So we have, and we used to have before Corona and all that, more foreigners than Egyptians in our department. And of course, that gave credit to the department because, as you know, AUC now is very financially oriented. And it was important that they had hard currency coming with the graduate students. And also, we have, now that we have a master's degree at AUC, people who are coming to do a master's degree in AUC are good. Usually they are good, some are very good. And to give you an idea of our the level of Egyptology at AUC, they all end up either in Oxford for a PhD, or in Harvard, or in Johns Hopkins, or whatever. I mean, if AUC was not acknowledged, they wouldn't go, they wouldn't accept the students. Yeah, so we have a very good program actually at AUC. It is missing Arabic, but there is so much to teach. You know, the time, the classes that we have do not allow for all that. So we should have an extra year to teach only Arabic. The students should do that. It may help them.
Fantastic. This means that we can, we have future collaboration between your program and mine.
Yes, we should. I think we should have more collaboration between interdisciplinary programs. Yes.
Well, I really want to thank you for a truly inspiring, and, you know, I've learned a tremendous lot from this, and what a challenge, you know, it seems so difficult. How long did it take you actually to
Well, I'm
master?
still learning. I'm retired and old, and I'm still learning. Because obviously the vocabulary and all that is not that easy, you know. To fine tune it, it's not that easy. And I say that now I have a student who is finishing a master right now about this topic at AUC, and I'm going to examine him in a week's time. He is working on that because it's important that people know that Arabic has Egyptian words, and that there is a link. You know, a civilization is not built independently from its past. We Egyptians today are very international because of all what we have seen. We have been invaded by the whole world. I mean, French, English, Greek, Italian, and all these left things. This is why we are what we are. They left traces of their language, of their culture, of everything. So we have to, you know, everything is not, I mean, nothing is totally negative or totally positive. But it is formative. Everything is formative. And this is important. And this is Egypt.
Absolutely. You know, layers and layers, right?
Exactly. And same thing with their language, and same thing. And even if you are talking to people, peasants in Upper Egypt, for example, you will find a deep wisdom. Where did they get it from? It's from the depths of the civilization that they have in their blood.
Okay. Thank you so much. This was really enriching and inspiring. And I can see from our participants that they just loved it. And the recording of the lecture will be available on the center's website. So please check it out. Give us a week or 10 days because it takes reformatting and editing, etc. But it will be up on the website very soon. Dr. Hickel, it was a great pleasure, really, hosting you and learning from you.
Thank you. That was my pleasure, really.
Thank you. Thank you, Faith. Thank you.
Anytime. Anytime.
Good night, everybody, and thank you for being with us.
Good night. Bye.